In the black community, there exists an undeniable travesty, one that has not only undoubtedly infiltrated the heart and spirit of black people worldwide, but diseased the mind in almost an incurable fashion. Many things afflict them, such as poverty, miseducation, drugs, violence, and broken homes, but none of these amounts to the biggest of all these issues, which is religion. Yes, religion. One may ask, how can serving God be an issue or represent a degradation? Isn't religion a means to live righteous or gain enlightenment of God? Although at first the answer would seemingly amount to yes, with adequate research and study, one would see religion has allowed the elite to oppress any form of true enlightenment and pervert the original people's concept of God. For if you misunderstand the true nature of God, or are led astray from seeking and seeing the truth, this thus alters the perception of oneself. As our ancestors and Kemet stated, man, know thyself, and you will know the gods. For instance, no matter what religious faction, sect, or organization you speak to, all of them refer to God or the Creator as a He, which only allows for a limited view, analysis, or overstanding of the Creator. See, our ancestors knew God had to be genderless, both male and female in aspect, a representation of the primordial duality which exists in nature and throughout the cosmos. They overstood the concepts of feminine and masculine properties and attributed the creation aspect of existence to the female. They knew the manifestation of the woman represented an extension of the cosmic womb, which gives life to all organic and inorganic forms of life. At the center of many ancient African-based belief systems was the exaltation of the woman, from whence forth all life was known to be generated. Upon the colonization of Africa, those that wished to suppress the feminine concept of creation and elevate the masculine alone distorted this truth, hence the false doctrine of woman being constructed from man. Look anywhere or at any point in the history of the human race and determine from whom all life spawns. This idealism leads not only to the destruction of the female, but the ability to demonize her and blame the occurrence of sin and all wrongdoings in the world as a result of the woman. This has especially led to the ongoing degradation of the black woman, being she is the original manifestation of all life here on earth. This is, in its entirety, an insult to God. As James Brown said, yes, it may be a man's world, but it wouldn't be anything without a woman, which once upon a time prevailed as common sense, but now exists as an unfounded insanity, delusion, and misinterpretation of natural forces. Not only has religion perverted this truth, it has also led to a docile, non-reactionary, and stagnant people, continuously subjected to oppression by the elite based on their ignorance. At the core of religions such as Islam and Christianity, one is made to believe it is righteous to suffer, do nothing in the process, and await a savior to return. This has led to black people for hundreds of years worldwide to experience the most horrific of crimes against humanity, such as enslavement, police brutality, rape, and other various forms of brutal chastisement. For if I'm made to believe a savior will come to punish my oppressor, I will tend to conceptualize my condition to seem less severe than what it actually is. Studying history, one would see that a true resolution never came through praying, going to church every Sunday, and awaiting change, but initiating it. I'm not saying that violence is the solution to all problems, but the concept of nonviolence proves inadequate when at the end of his life, MLK, who was the biggest supporter of nonviolence, stated, "I fear I may have integrated my people into a burning house." The very same nation and people who taught us to be nonviolent and non-reactionary are the very same people who've gained and held on to ultimate control through means exactly opposite. The turn the other cheek doctrine practiced endlessly by black people has proven ineffective. Isn't it time for a new strategy? Religion has also misconstrued and proposed a form of reward-punishment psychological effect on black people through its concepts of heaven and hell. Black people still to this day believe of a heaven in the sky and hell in the ground doctrine, initially propagated to manipulate the minds of the people into submission. If I can control your perception of life and death, I'm able to exert power and influence over you based on the fear of it. Our ancestors understood that true enlightenment and resurrection had nothing to do with coming out of a grave, but the obtainment of a consciousness which allowed us to experience heaven and hell while here on earth. The only grave we rise out of is that of subconscious programming, or that which the Egyptians called the halls of Amenti. Those ruling over us, though, have only given us one reality, or hell, to live in, while they live out their version of heaven based on our ongoing ignorance. As black people, we are plagued with illnesses that lead to an early death, relying on the same oppressor to treat and heal us, ignorant to the fact that an overstanding of our own physiological anatomy can allow for self-healing. While we blame an imaginary figure called the devil for all of our trials and tribulations, we never truly take responsibility for our own actions, which ultimately leads to a form of denial and not taking responsibility for one's own life or circumstances, thus relying on others to give us meaning every day. Instead of changing our situation and manifesting our own destiny, we only sit back and mesmerize on how Jesus will fix it. Which leads to another spell put on the minds of the people, that there existed a historical personage in the form of a person called Jesus. Rather than focusing on themselves and upliftment of our community as a whole, our lives revolve around a fictitious character in order to provide us salvation. See, no matter what you choose to call him, those who study the history of religion know that the attributes that make up this fictional character were those borrowed from prior belief systems and cultures predating Christianity by thousands of years. The imagery of Christ is none other than a tool used to perpetuate the cycle of white supremacy. In fact, the term Christ, which many confuse for a person, actually evolved from the Greek word Christos, meaning to anoint. This means that Christ is not one person, but a title taken on by various saviors, historical or non-historical. Is it a coincidence that the Hindu god's name Krishna has the same root as Christos, and later on indicated in the term Christians? See, instead of every so often changing the meaning or imagery of a so-called Jesus as shown throughout many cultures, let's just realize that Jesus existed. This would allow black people to fix their situation instead of waiting for someone else to do it. This is one of the mysteries which have been hidden, though, that each and every one in their own aspect is a God, and through enlightenment can gain a Christ consciousness. Most black people you encounter either don't know, have never took the time, or even analyzed Psalms 82:6. Our ancestors composed most of the texts of religious books such as the Bible, with esoteric meaning, but through a degradation of the mind and disconnect with culture, most take the stories as literal rather than symbolic. Symbolic to mature this nature of the soul in an effort to evolve it into its higher purpose outside of this physical reality. This applies to various figures in the Bible and events, which to this day have been proven to have never existed or happened, such as the Exodus story. However, black people use these fictional events or personages to somehow explain away their own suffering, leading to a severe form of cognitive dissonance and Stockholm syndrome. Few have heard of Dr. Joy DeGruwy's research into post-traumatic slave syndrome, and thus don't understand the significance religion has played in making us a powerless and submissive people. For if you can adopt a theology of submittance in accepting your oppression, you can blame no one else for your condition other than yourself. Africans who later became slaves were often beaten, mutilated, and killed for holding on to their indigenous belief systems and not accepting that of their oppressor. These crude forms of conversion was built on biblical verses such as Leviticus chapter 25, verse 44, Colossians chapter 3, verse 22, 1 Timothy 6 chapter, verses 1 through 2, and many other quotations in and throughout the Bible. This is where the contradiction comes in for black people. For how can you be moral based on immoral teachings, righteous when having to reside in that which is unrighteous? For if the Bible is truly inspired by God, you have to accept the whole word and not just part of it, right? This is similar to the concept of a drug dealer selling drugs to a neighborhood, then using the money from sales to build a hospital or school for the residents. You can't drug the people and try to save them at the same time. This has been a successful campaign in the black community, though, as religion in the church is the number one stop shop, peddling ignorance and misinterpretation to the minds of the people. And like drug dealers, preachers push a false sense of hope and struggling on another day, providing temporary relief. But eventually the high has to come down, with those being misguided needing more. More and more lies until they get to the point where they are relying on the church, congregation, or pastor instead of being taught to be self reliant. Many blacks will say that God or religion saved their lives, and they have no one else to champion for their success other than this. But if you're jobless and begin to put the effort in writing resumes, contacting employees, and actually succeed in landing a job, was that due to a commitment on your own behalf? Or was it God doing for you what you should have been doing for yourself all along? See, in order to explain our position as a worldly people and try to sympathize with our intolerable condition, we've become so mentally distraught that our lives can't be directed without some oppressor or imaginary figure directing our actions. We seem to be unable to live with the thought of us being a second class people and therefore implement what I call an oppressed savior complex syndrome. Unable to overstand a way to elevate above our own situation, so we just await a savior to do so. True enlightenment comes via self-insight and study, rather than awaiting someone else to clarify our spiritual significance. It's obvious to see that we were more powerful as a people prior to religious indoctrination, and that the introduction of such wicked systems has made us more easily controlled. It was not until we allowed others to define our spiritual essence that we began to fall or descend in enlightenment, which is the true fall of Lucifer, going from a spiritual nature to an only physical one, as taught by the early Gnostics. The benefit of our fall, or any descent for that matter, though, is that it allows for a resurrection of the mind and spirit. I'm speaking of the phoenix arising from the ashes. For how could we ever become the masters of high sciences again if we never knew what it means to start from again and thus rise again? Don't worry though, some good religious folks will deem my sayings as heresy and enthralled in devilishment, obvious to say the least.